Over the 5 years producer Doug Stanley has spent at sea, over 60 men have died. Covering another tragic loss never gets easy.
It's one of the difficult things we do in our job here. We're telling the tale, the truth of what happens out here. And sometimes the truth isn't a pretty story.
Through a lifetime of adventures and decades of work in television production, I have traveled the world extensively. Over time, I became known for my Edge of the Earth productions, most notably as a founding and long-term producer of Discovery Channel's Deadliest Catch.
Producer Doug Stanley, the veteran cameraman, braved the world's most hazardous workspace.
I'm Doug Stanley, and this is Wilder Yet. Today, you get to meet my television hero, Chad Greulach, the creator of American Chopper and many other fabulous series. Chad, great to have you. You know, one of my great friends. How many years has it been?
I think 30 plus for sure. I think it goes back to probably 1995 was our first outing, Doug.
And I remember you were producing that day and I was shooting. What was the show we were doing?
We met when we were shooting a thing for the Learning Channel at the time, which was a different thing than it is now. And it was about hot shots jumping into fires out of airplanes or helicopters. And we were out in the rolling hills of your area up there in Northern California. And you were the camera operator and I was the field producer. And we got along like frickin' frack, and the rest was history.
I remember in those days you were doing a lot of Real Stories of the Highway Patrol too.
Yeah,
right?
I was doing a lot. I cut my teeth on that show, Real Stories of the Highway Patrol, and then through the 90s really bounced from show to show to show. And there was a time when I thought it was really important to learn a little bit about everything. Today's generation of producers tend to do one thing. They're in post or the field or pick up a camera, but back then we used to do it all.
Yeah, we did. And I remember doing a bunch of different things with you. You know, one of the things that's always impressed me about you, you know, one of the things that I can actually feel your education. You have a degree in film and television from Pepperdine, right? Well, isn't that right?
You're right. Yeah, you got your facts straight. Yeah, math communications, journalism out of Pepperdine. Again, story was really big for me coming up, and I wanted to kind of master that, learn the art of storytelling. And so I was fortunate to come to Malibu and coming right out of high school in Pebble Beach and, learn my trade a bit, but there was no substitute for getting out there in the field and doing the real thing, you know that.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to the startup world that we share too. I had this crazy opportunity in my life to launch the world's first 3D television network. And one of the first people I reached for was you, you know?
I appreciate that, Doug. I mean, I really do. That's I was at a meeting yesterday with the CMO of a major cosmetic company, and there's not a meeting I have that venture doesn't come up in some way, shape, or form. I mean, listen, we were bouncing 3D content off a satellite in 1998. Who did that? No one. I mean, clearly we were trying to put glasses on people's faces before we had the horsepower to do that. Studios came along and did have that financial horsepower and did find 3D in the theaters, but yeah, we were ahead of our time for sure. It was hyper creative. I mean, we were running a $100 million company out of a beach house in Venice, California, and skateboarding to work. So, I mean, an opportunity, I guess I got to thank you for almost 20 years later.
Yeah, it was really something. There were some highlights on it that I'll remember, and I'm sure you do too. One of them was the show we did in New Orleans where we had that $500,000 theater built. We put up that theater and we played the shows for the first time. And Gwendolyn Oliver was dressed in all latex presenting. And we had people like Barry Diller coming in to see our demo and seeing 3D television for the very first time, you know?
That's fantastic, and I got to correct myself. That wasn't almost 20 years ago. It was 25 years ago that we were there in Venice running that venture, and just sky was the limit, Doug. I mean, and I think that it's something I really appreciate about you is that sense that anything can be done. I remember the kids are going to love it. We draw upon our life experience. Life teaches us the most about everything. And, would we have done things differently? I don't really know, frankly. It was a real creative time. And again, I think we were ahead of our time a little bit with that technology. But gosh, I wish I had an opportunity to get back into that spirit again and just, no ceilings, no walls, let's go for it. Remember, we could also convert 2D to 3D. That was part of the technology.
Right.
And I remember bringing a friend of mine, and his name's Charles Rifkin. He's now, he's gone on to do great things, but he took us into the Henson Company at the time. Well, actually, Charlie Rifkin used to run the Jim Henson Company, and he took us into Sony at the time to convert their library from 2D to 3D. So, I mean, it wasn't that we were just out there running wild in Venice. We actually had the support of the industry. It's just, I think timing has so much to do with everything.
And remember, we had Ely Samaha and Phil Roman on our advisory board, the guy who created The Simpsons. It's amazing, really what we did. And Saban was looking at us at the same time. But for me, it was this wild ride because of the nature of the public company, the growth of the assets growing and purchasing that pay-per-view system across the Southwest, and that software company, 3D modeling software company, Strata, and then getting on the American Stock Exchange and, the excitement. We were illegally running an office out of a mansion on the beach in Venice Beach, rollerblading and skateboarding to work. We had surfboards in there. We could go right out and surf. And we started growing on the American Stock Exchange. And I remember some very exciting times,
Gosh, I don't know where you're taking this story, Doug, but for me, it was exciting times, but it was also almost surreal. And looking back, it was almost too good to be true. We learned a lot from that time, right? It seemed that the future was ours to take. I remember having just so much money in the bank and feeling I was going to retire at 30. And then remember what happened, it was 99, 2000, the stock market crashed, and all of a sudden that rug got pulled out from under us. And then we were left with, gosh, what do we do now? Who the heck are we, and what are we doing next? So, listen, I think, just like life teaches us, our greatest lessons, sometimes it's the challenges and the most difficult times that teach us the most as well. And there's nothing like learning from the failure of a publicly traded company. Listen, it wasn't any one person's failure. It was timing. It was the market. It was so many things. But to go from $100 million company to they're closing up shop, you learn a lot through that process. And I do think that we learn a lot more from the hard times than we do in those the celebration times. It's great to celebrate, but got to go through. Gosh, I think you got to go through 50, 100 hard times to be able to really celebrate and have it be something completely, worthy of celebration. We were younger. Listen, when I was 28 years old at the time. So to have that kind of money in the bank, or at least, listen, I didn't have the money in the bank. I had money in the form of stock, which, as we know, is not real. So there's so many lessons, Doug, that we learned in that. But gosh, I can remember the late night pickups and going out to play. We played hard, and we played. There's a time and place for everything, and I'm certainly thankful for that chapter.
Yeah, and with the recent 3D wave, I'm saying recent, 12 years ago, 3D television came around again. For us, it was coming around again. And it was really interesting to find out that we were essentially 15 years ahead of the guys who were 10 years ahead of themselves, Just to watch them make the same mistakes we made. And of course, nobody would ask us, what they should do. But we watched billions of dollars being spent in the 3D industry. I was just pulling my hair out watching how they were doing this. Of course, we did do Showdown on the Sand, Discovery Channel's first 3D program together, you and I.
That's right. We did a lot of firsts together, Doug, and, that being one of them.
I think one of my favorite stories about you is when it was after C3D came down, the markets came down, and you gave me this call. You were all excited. You'd found this father and son in an upstate New York, and these guys build custom motorcycles. And I remember you telling me the story, like how it's all going to go, what your vision was of this reality series of this father and son. I remember telling you, I don't know if you got a show here, Chad. How long has American Chopper been on air now? It's like gone for 25 seasons or something, right? It's incredible how long that lasted on air, but it all originated in, like, I remember you telling me that you were going out to go shoot American Chopper.
It wasn't originally American Chopper. It was originally East Coast answer to Motorcycle Mania, Jesse James' show on the West Coast. That's all it was. It was a one-off at the time. And at the time, I had come in to run a company called Pilgrim Films and Television, which is now Pilgrim Media. And the only thing on the slate was this custom motorcycle build. So I looked at the casting, and it was actually cast out of a place called Plaistow, New Hampshire, Kingstar Custom Cycles, a guy named Carl Goodwin, actually. And I remember calling Carl, and this was my opportunity, Doug. We both know where we came from. We both know that we love a great story. And I wanted to do documentaries. I've been wanting to do documentaries since I was a kid. I came out of college, documentaries became reality television, and flash forward 11 years, I'm in the seat to do a documentary on Discovery Channel on a motorcycle company on the East Coast. I called Carl Goodwin, and I remember telling him, I want to do an old school documentary. And I remember at the time he was like, well, I still got to build motorcycles out here. And I just had this feeling, Doug, that this wasn't the right guy. So I went back to the casting folder and found these Pauls, Paul Sr., Paul Jr. They'd done a Spider-Man bike at the time. I remember calling Paul Jr., and telling him what I wanted to do. This is after I'd already gone to Kingstar, had this gut feeling that I'm not gonna get any access with these people at Kingstar Custom Cycles. I get on the phone with Paulie. I was 29. I think Paulie was 27 at the time. And I let him know what I wanted to do. I want to come out and do an old school documentary. I remember Paulie telling me, come on out to Brock Tavern, New York. You'll have full access. If you go with us, you're going to get everything you need. And so I really got along well with Paulie. And gosh, I think it wasn't, a month later, I was boots on ground in Rock Tavern, New York, with an XL1, with an audio guy tethered to my back. I mean, not to date myself, but it was 2002. And I spent 6 weeks there, with father, son, with that shop, really embedding myself in that community. And for me, I came from, a military family, and my father was no nonsense and a lot like Senior, and Junior and I were a lot alike. So I was able to really identify with that father-son story and capture it in a way with that access that converted. We took, at the time, 9/11 had happened the year before, clearly 2001. And so we decided, if they do these theme bikes, let's do a tribute bike, a jet bike to honor those, the military and those who protect and serve us. So we decided to build the jet bike, which was a tribute to the armed forces and those who protect our freedoms here in America. Tracked that build over 6 weeks, shop dynamics, just basically rolled tape. It was different than we produce series now. That time it was just like, shoot it, just roll, come back and cut it. Now we're on different kinds of budgets and schedules. 6 weeks later, we unveiled that bike, the Jet Fighter bike, in Laconia Bike Week. And kind of the rest was history. We brought the footage back. We were cutting the footage here in Los Angeles. And I remember the executive from Discovery at the time came out to our offices, and I had been cutting for 3 or 4 weeks at the time in the edit bay. And the executive came in and said, can I see some of the motorcycle show? We had some other projects going at the time, but asked to see the motorcycle show. Went in the bay, showed him, and I remember the response. He was like, oh my gosh, this is like our Osbournes. So at that time, Osbournes were kind of the family reality follow doc kind of format that established itself. There was no other format that became American Chopper. We were the first. We leaned into the Americana of it, that sense of spirit that I found there in Rock Tavern, that I found with Senior and Junior, and that relatable family dynamic that we uncovered there, and titled it American Chopper, and the rest was history. Frankly, Doug, as you know, and I mean, I don't need to belabor it, but you know how the story goes. In fact, it was several months later, we were watching, the Tuttles on Letterman, Tonight Show, covers of every magazine, and they were off to the races. What was really cool about American Chopper was it also was the first example of building an internal brand, being OCC within the title of American Chopper. OCC itself became a billion-dollar brand over time. The ancillary brand extensions on the surface level, the t-shirts and hats of it all, but then those extensions that went beyond that, but that was really a model that continued on and has manifested itself in billions of dollars since for many other series that have driven brands like OCC. So American Chopper was the series that millions of people watched every week for many, many years. And OCC was the beneficiary of those eyeballs in the form of that series being a brand driver to their brand, which they owned everything of. Sad end of their story, they ended up suing each other. Sometimes, these people that we come into, the best talent is often the most raw and genuine and authentic. And the Tuttles were that when I met them in 2002. Put them through seasons, put them on the stages of the Tonight Show and Letterman and everything else, and all of a sudden they're celebrities. It damaged the Tuttles relationship, unfortunately, and they ended up suing each other. I really don't know where they are now, to be honest. I wrote to Senior yesterday, and he and Billy Lane and Jesse James are teaming up on a new venture. And I wrote to Senior and I said, hey, wouldn't it be ironic, wouldn't it be karmic for us to work together again and do this right? So frankly, this is a current topic in my life, and I haven't ever lost sight. Frankly, for me, it's been a bit of a bar that has been a high bar to reach again, because frankly, once you do something like establish a series like American Chopper, it's hard to outdo that. It's going to be hard to replicate the 0 to 100 that we did at the very beginning of reality television and the family docu-soap. That was the first. There's only one first in anything.
Yeah, and the truth is, when I look back at your storied career, there's all kinds of programming that you did that really changed the face of television. That one was definitely avant-garde. Genres shifted and changed. Chris Angel Mindfreak comes to mind as well. Now, that was you in the development end, right? You were the first person that ever told me about Chris, right?
Chris Angel Mindfreak was actually brought to A&E through a company called The Firm. I was represented by The Firm at the time. I happened to see Chris Angel's demo tape in my living room by late Paul Frank, who was an executive producer at The Firm. His father's Rich Frank of ABC Lore and the studios, is a big studio executive and has an apple winery, yada, yada, yada. Bottom line, we put in a CD of this magician named Chris Angel in my living room in, I don't remember what year that was, but it must have been right around that time, 2004, 2005-ish. He was like, Mindfreak. He was crazy. They had to completely restyle Chris and give him kind of his, what became his image and his look. It was a really great example of artist development. But that was version 1. That was Chris Angel version 1, Mindfreak. Millions of people flocked to it on A&E. Fantastic. Flash forward. I was working with Spike, which is gone now, but it was a male skewing channel that I was working with show to show to show. They had a show with Chris Angel. Chris was, the show I was involved in was about 10 years after Mindfreak. Now, a lot happened in those 10 years. One of those things was high definition. So I got brought on. Chris Angel was the executive producer, the magician, and the executive producer of Chris Angel Believe on Spike. We had an air date of November. An executive friend of mine at Spike called, said, we had this air date, can you meet it? Chris had produced 150 disparate illusions and demonstrations that had no cohesive through line. And so that project was working with Chris, working with Dave Barham, who is still, I believe, his manager, working with Dave Barham, and identifying how are we going to put this up on the wall and find some kind of a through line. So we took those 100 plus illusions and demonstrations, we literally put them on the wall. We went behind the scenes with Chris's magic team and went into the making of, pulled back the curtain for the first time, if you will, brought those characters, the supporting characters, to life, and then thematically connected the dots in each of those episodes. So literally, if you look at 100 plus illusions across 8 episodes, stacked on cards down a wall, we thematically identified what each of those episodes represented, had a big payoff illusion or demonstration at the end, and then use narrative to put a through line through each of those episodes. So the biggest challenge for Chris Angel Believe was the difference between standard def and high def. Once we got in there, there's a lot to magic that happens that was revealed once things went high def. So we were dancing with a timeline, we were dancing with a through line, and then we were challenged by the fact that all of a sudden you started seeing things that you weren't supposed to be seeing. So it was a challenging project. It was, I call it the Santa Claus effect, where, you see how things are done and you're just like, oof, really? Ah, darn. What I loved most about Chris Angel Believe was the sense of suspension of disbelief. And I think that magic hasn't worked a lot on television. We have Copperfield, we have David Blaine, we have Chris Angel. And those have worked, but magic, if I try to pitch a show about the magic competition series, and I have, not a lot of response to that. What was great about that series and what I loved about kind of the premise of magic and pop in general is the fact that it allows you to suspend disbelief. And at a time, we're in tricky times in the world, I love watching adults see something happen and go, how did that happen? That, only through a magician, a skilled magician like Chris or David or Blaine or Copperfield, are you able to pull that off on television? You got to have the charisma to live on television. You got to have the skill to pull off illusions and demonstrations, and then you have to have the mechanics to be able to do those illusions and demonstrations. So it's not everyone can do it. You can't just take an amateur magician and say, hey, go do a television show. Those are real special guys, and Chris is one of those real special guys that really brings it to life and has a very unique way of doing it.
Let me see, I think right about that time, or maybe before you did Believe, the Gastineau Girls. I see you smiling right now, man. That was a wacky, fun show, following Mark Gastineau's wife and daughter in their Fifth Avenue life. And we took them to the guy who made clothes that had like tattoo art on them. Remember that?
Ed Hardy. Yeah, we took him to Ed Hardy. Were you on that show with me? Did I bring you on that show?
Yeah.
Of course. Gosh, it's crazy. That was so long ago, Doug. I got to say, Gastineau Girls, though, was coming right off of American Chopper. And to be quite honest, in my life and career, and it's kind of come to a head in my life at this point, I've been chasing this elusive something. And, for me, it's kind of American Chopper. When you say Gastineau Girls, and the reason I respond to it, first of all, Brittany's another person that I've just recently reconnected with, just ironically. And then number two, that was really my attempt at doing my mother-daughter answer to the father-son American Chopper I had just done the series prior. So, gosh, again, it's tough to outdo number one, and clearly Gastineau Girls did not have the success of American Chopper, but again, it was very different. I know we leaned into the Sex and the City of kind of the Upper East Side of Manhattan. We had a doorman character. We were given creative freedom at the time. It was a different time than it is today, when they'd say, hey, just go make the show, do something creative, be different, because guess what? It hadn't been done before. Now there's so many contextualization. A lot of times I'll read it's the Gastineau Girls meets American Chopper meets whatever. You weren't able to do that before there was American Chopper or Gastineau Girls or whatever. And that goes the same with It's Amazing Race meets, It's Amazing Race meets Special Forces meets whatever. Before those whatevers were created, there were no references. We were just out making things that made sense and that connected with the audience. Now it's much more about metrics and mergers, and a lot of the life has been squeezed out of our industry as we knew it.
Yeah, it's funny, being at this age right now as a producer, and you were talking earlier about, because you're at the German level of American Chopper and shows that have really blown up and gone big, and how do you beat that, Deadliest Catch for me the same way, 7 of us went to Dutch Harbor to shoot the pilot, the 3-hour pilot, and now my brother is still on those ships 20 years later. It's actually his 21st year on the boats. And like, how do you beat that? It's been in 200 countries and 45 languages. And, you know, I get pulled over by the federales in Central America, and the only reason they don't beat me up and throw me in jail is because I produce, you know, pesca mortal, you know, deadliest catch in Spanish. It's amazing to see when your projects have spread around the world and you feel these feelings. You really just want that again, and you want to be a genre bender, and you want to be somebody that creates something that is previously unthought of. And right now, I'm kind of channeling you in some ways. You know, I wasn't there when you made the doorman of the Gastineau girls' apartment building. I wasn't there when you decided that he was going to become the narrator and a powerful figure in the show. I know you guys were stuck on the curb waiting all that time, and you kept talking to this guy, and he's like, those guys, they're always late, they're coming down, and you recognize the moment, you know? And so right now with what I'm doing in Nazaré, Portugal with North Point, I'm looking at the characters that are around that could potentially be the doorman like you used in Gastineau Girls. And one of them is this guy that's got this great big handlebar mustache, and he's in the booth taking everybody's coins as they have to go into the harbor to get to their jet skis and their warehouses where their surfboards are to surf Nazaré. And he knows everybody. They all stop in front of him and they go in and out. But I'm not going to use the guy, but I think about that character a lot. And I think about other impacts that you had, you know, for me looking at, you had something to do with Gene Simmons as well, if I remember right.
Man, you're pulling them out, man. And to your credit, Doug, Nazaré is your evolution, but it's also your way of digging into your toolbox that you've established over these years and translating it in a different way. And so, to your credit, I think you deserve that credit and should take it as I'm giving it. That, you know, we're both responsible for our own forms of storytelling. For me, I've always leaned into narrative devices like the doorman or Gene Simmons or the Tuttles, those sit-down interviews. With Gene Simmons, I had the opportunity to work with one of my favorite producers in town, literally, and a close friend of mine, Adam Reed. Leslie Greif was the executive producer on that series. The series belonged to Gene and Leslie. Mm-hmm. Leslie Greif was Chevy Chase's slapstick comedy writer. So for me, that was really an opportunity to learn proper comedy and to put that on a wall. I mentioned the wall. I'm a big visual guy as far as I need to see it on a wall. And so blocking comedy out, that was a great opportunity for me to do that. And Adam Reed and I shared an office at the time. It was a new series. I replaced a showrunner who Gene had kind of kicked down the hill, not the right person. And I had replaced that person. So Adam ran the bay. I ran the field, and together we teamed up when we hit that thing out of the park, season 1, for Rob Chernow and Nancy Dubuque, and gosh, it was just Elaine Fontaine Bryant, a lot of names that now run that channel, A&E. They were in our offices trying to crack it back in, I guess it was 2000, and gosh, I don't know the years. But Gene Simmons was an exercise in a lot of skill sets as far as talent handling. Gene is no joke. I really learned time management with Gene. If the directions weren't clear to a location and I'd show up and he had gotten a bit lost, he would walk over to me and he'd pull out his call sheet and point to the line that was not clear and just, you know, ask me to do better. My first interaction with Gene Simmons was humbling, to say the least. I had replaced the series showrunner. I remember driving to Gene Simmons' house for the first time. My wife had bought me a Gene Simmons kiss book before I went to the house for the first time, like, Gene's lucky to have you kind of thing. I remember calling my wife on the way to Gene Simmons' house and saying, oh my gosh, I'm going there. This is so cool. I showed up, walked into the kitchen. The crew was there, established crew. Again, I was replacing a showrunner, so I was the new guy on set. I walked into Gene's kitchen. And I let him know. I had my speech planned, and I walked in and I let him know what my goals were, what my objectives were, what I hoped to bring to the series, what I appreciated about him and his family and the family dynamic. I told him about my family and that I had, you know, I think I had one daughter at the time. And Gene looked at me and he just went, and he looked away. I had talked too much. Okay, so I learned from Gene to keep it short, keep it tight, get to the point, and make your words matter. So that was my first experience with Gene Simmons. We went on to shoot. We went on to shoot the first season. It was a wild experience, full access, a lot of trust. Shannon Tweed was Gene Simmons' girlfriend at the time. I don't know if they're married now or not. We tracked that in season 1. That was kind of the payoff for season 1 of Gene Simmons Family Jewels was, will Gene Simmons marry Shannon Tweed or will they not get married? Shannon at the time was a PTA mom and Nick was getting good grades and so was Sophie. And so it was really important that we allowed that to happen as we produced the series. I often reflect on Gene Simmons Family Jewels when I'm going into any new cast, Snoop Dogg, Birdman, whomever, and I say, listen, I understand that your business has to go on. We'll work around you. It was really important with Gene Simmons Family Jewels because production had taken over Shannon's garage that we were really, really respectful. Gene sold the show to A&E, kind of sold his family down the river with it. They wanted a family show. I'm not quite sure Shannon and Nick and Sophie were down with season 1, but it went on and became good things for everyone, and it was certainly good for me in the evolution of my career and learning to say more and fewer words, but also just to exercise that skill set a little bit more and just continue to grow. And I learned comedy on Gene Simmons Family Jewels.
Hey, you and I have so much to talk about. I'm going to have you on for another episode at some point. But before we go on this one, let's talk about Resume Speed, which is now called American MC on YouTube. It's an hour and 43 minutes long, and it's got an aggregate of 250 million views. It's unbelievable that it's come this far. But you and I were out in the field producing a show that was unlike anything else. We had built this plan where we were hopscotching 15 passenger vans of crews through Arizona, chasing this group of wannabe outlaw motorcycle club riders who were trying to form a club and become the tough guys. They wanted to become the pack of wackos.
It's one of those shows that I flip through, seeing, kind of what am I going to watch tonight? And it pops up and I just think, what the heck happened? How did that thing, to be quite honest, Doug, I look at Resume Speed. Resume Speed was a really cool opportunity. I was in the motorcycle culture. You were comfortable in the motorcycle culture. We worked with a very large national motorcycle club. We worked in close cooperation. That was led by an executive producer who he himself rode hard, great character, wild man in his own right. And I remember your call and saying, come on out here to Arizona. We're going to do this giant loop from Phoenix up to the Grand Canyon, back down through Salt River Canyon to Florence. We were going to follow this pack of a dozen weekend warrior executives who are going to ride up through this area, form their own motorcycle club, and live that life. And along the way, they'd meet this notorious motorcycle club. That footage can kind of reflect what that club was. And, it was the harrowing adventures of that kind of escapism ride of a lifetime. Great experience. I think the last thing I said to that executive producer was to lose my number. To watch that show on the air or streaming now and my name attached to it, frankly, is a little bit of a there have been a lot of those in my career, and frankly, I let a lot of them go without calling them out or understanding my own role in them. And I can only hope that the amassed experience and not all the lessons have been favorable and gone in my direction. So I'm only hopeful that, I've learned from some of those challenges and evolved a bit myself and matured a bit in a way that, allows me to have a better future. Because I don't know where you're going with that story, Doug, but that was a wild adventure, a lot of cool coverage. You were up in the helicopter. We were shooting West Cams at the time. It was insane. Another kind of hair back on fire, roaring, ripping through the highways of, rural backwoods of Arizona. Kind of, it was a great experience, but that was just a blur to me, frankly, Doug. I was in Prescott 2 weeks ago in that same hotel we were staying in, on that square. Remember, we'd roll into a town with all those guys and just take it over. And because we were with that infamous motorcycle club and we had cameras and we were just blasting through Arizona, we kind of had carte blanche to do whatever we wanted. God, I remember that experience. That was the first time I ever had Gary Busey's saliva on my face. I remember, coming back after that ride, and he just got up in my face and he just pointed at me, he's spitting in my face. And I was just standing there, just taking it. And that was also the time he almost ran me off the.
Do you remember there was this moment where, like, I was directing the helicopter, but I was on the ground and it had run out of fuel and it had to run back to town to fuel up. But the motorcycles were coming and we had this directive, don't stop the motorcycles. But I had to stop the motorcycles because I had no helicopter to shoot them with. And Gary Busey had been riding behind, like he was like 20 minutes behind everybody, right? And he saw them, they had pulled into a road to the right and then all turned around, they're all waiting to go. And he turned into that corner, he turned right, but he never stopped turning. He went straight off the road, down this embankment and into these cactus. And that was just one of the funny things we saw from Gary Busey on that trip, I'll tell you. But, Chad, since we do have so much that we could talk about, I definitely want to have you on for another episode, and it's always great to talk to you. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you too, Doug. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And we got so many stories. I hadn't really remembered how many stories we had until this. And gosh, that was only 5 years of a 25-year career. So, I think we got some more to talk about. We can do it over a beer on the Zoom. But
yeah, let's have a beer next time. That sounds good with me.
Okay.
All right.
All right. I'll be there by morning.
All right. See ya.